I'm super happy to introduce Lindsay Stallcup. She's the current executive director of the Monteverde Conservation League, which is the body that runs the Costa Rica, the Children's Eternal Rainforest. It's an NGO that runs the Children's Eternal Rainforest, and that rainforest is Costa Rica's largest private reserve. A little bit about Lindsay. She grew up in California. She earned her BA at Stanford in human biology in 1999. She then crossed the country to Georgia, where she obtained her MS in ecology at UGA at Odom in 2004 under Kathy Pringle, working on stream ecology in the Streams project at La Selva Biological Station, which is the big station that's run by OTS in Costa Rica. She also worked as a teaching assistant with the UGA Costa Rica Tropical Ecology Program for a couple of years. In 2005, she received a Fulbright fellowship to continue her research on streams in the Monteverde region. And then she never left Monteverde. She made Monteverde her home from there forward. When UGA had the campus in Monteverde, Lindsay was the academic program manager there from 2008 to 2015. After which she started working with the Monteverde Conservation League and is in the current position that she's in now, which is Challenge Every Day. When she's not at work, you can find Lindsay hiking the steep hills in San Luis of Monteverde and spending time with her family. And I nominated her to be a seminar speaker. Number one, she's a UGA alum, go Dogs. She's a great role model for students who want to work abroad and want to understand a little bit about it. And also for those who want to make a career working with NGO. In addition, the story of how the Children's Eternal Rainforest came to be and how it's become a successful model for conservation in Costa Rica is one that I really believe needs to be shared with a wide audience. And in fact, we have two Warnell students who were on my course last year who were so inspired by the story that they're now actively fundraising for it. So without much further ado, I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
All right. Thank you very much, Sonia, and thanks for the opportunity to be here, or to be far away, sharing my screen and talking with you all. Hopefully the rainstorm and the internet will hold out for the talk. So I will explain in a little bit why I called the talk what I did. But this is a little bit about me, a little bit about how I got here, and then a whole lot about our organization and the Children's Eternal Rainforest. And I will try to leave time for questions. So as Dr. Hernandez mentioned, I started off at Stanford and I made my way to UGA, where I worked on the effects of water chemistry in tropical streams on leaf breakdown and other related processes. And I dug through some really old pictures, maybe for the entertainment of anyone out there who knows Marcelo Ardon, who also was a fellow Pringle lab student. From there, I migrated to working at the UGA Costa Rica campus, and I was there for a number of years. I worked there, as Sonia mentioned, first as a teaching assistant, later in administration, for approximately, I don't even know how many years, from 2003 until 2015, more or less, in a whole bunch of different functions. And when I decided to start looking for a new job, it was because I said that I was very stressed out and very bored at the same time. I felt like I was so stressed out by my job, but at the same time, I could have done it in my sleep. And I just really, really wished that I could have a job that would be a challenge. And so you have to be really careful what you wish for sometimes, because sometimes you get it. And I had the opportunity to apply to be the executive director of the Monteverde Conservation League. I didn't know very much about the organization at that point in time. I didn't really know what an executive director was or did. I didn't know much about nonprofits. But I was very excited to get back into working on things more related to conservation, which is what I had studied and hoped to work in. And so in August of 2015, I became the supervisor of an incredible team of people who work to protect the Children's Eternal Rainforest. We call it BEN, which is short for Bosque Eterno de los Niños, which is the name of the reserve in Spanish. So if I talk about BEN during the talk today, I am not talking about a person named Ben. I'm talking about the Bosque Eterno de los Niños, which is the name of our reserve. And I quickly became the supervisor of this gigantic team of amazing people who, as we will see later on in the talk, are spread out all over the place. There's 32 of us on staff right now. And sometimes people ask me what I do on any given day. And this week I thought was a really great example to demonstrate that, which is that there is no way to predict what will happen on any given day. Monday, I started off by helping my colleagues figure out what to do with the drainage behind our office, which has been flooding with heavy rains and mud, followed by a phone call about wildfire firefighter training and a board meeting. Tuesday morning, we had a field test for wildland firefighter training, which involved walking 5 kilometers with a heavy pack in a certain amount of time. And then I've been working on a grant proposal. Yesterday, we spent 5 hours in a meeting with lawyers about a property dispute with a neighbor. Today, I'm here talking to you. In the morning, we had a meeting with a financial advisor. So it's really a little bit all over the place. It is definitely a challenge. It has been a learning curve that really has never quit. And I will tell you a little bit more about that as I tell you about the Conservation League and the BEN. To give a little bit of background, conservation in Costa Rica really got its start due to this alarming rate of deforestation. Costa Rica had one of the highest rates of deforestation in the world, and it managed to lose about half of its forest cover between 1940 and 1987, as you can see on this map. During that trajectory, some smart people started to realize that if they didn't do something to stop deforestation and also to restore and reforest areas that had been deforested, that we were really going to be in big trouble. And so it's against this backdrop that we have efforts for conservation throughout the country, including efforts here in Monteverde. So just to give you a quick timeline, the first conservation in Monteverde actually happened thanks to a group of Quakers who settled here in the 1950s and set aside part of their property to protect the watershed. They called their land Bosque Eterno, which means eternal forest. It's completely different from the Bosque Eterno de los Niños, but that's part of where we get our name. The creation of the Monteverde Cloud Forest Preserve, the creation of the Children's Eternal Rainforest and Warnell National Park. This map, I think, is really, really important because it shows kind of the BEN as the centerpiece, not only the largest player, but also the central player in this larger block of protected area. So the Bosque Eterno de los Niños protects about 22,600 hectares of forest. That's about 56,000 acres. And it's the centerpiece of a larger, approximately 50,000 hectare block of protected areas. And if we just imagine what this block would look like without the BEN in the middle, we can see that we're left with a lot of really important reserves, but all of a sudden they are islands and not connected to one another. In the beginning, the Monteverde Conservation League was founded in 1986, and one of the original the original focus was the Pacific slope below Monteverde, which looks something like this picture that you can see here, a lot of deforestation for cattle and other types of farming. And the people who founded the league, it was a group of 14 neighbors here in Monteverde, wanted to look at how to stop deforestation, how to reforest, and how to promote sustainability. But that focus quickly changed to include land purchase for conservation, because what is now the heart of the Bosque Eterno de los Niños was being cut down to make space for homesteads and farming. And so the focus changed in a hurry to see how money could be raised to purchase the land from those landowners and save the primary rainforest and cloud forests that was just starting to be appreciated by biologists and conservationists, and on the other hand was in a very immediate threat of disappearing. In 1987, a biologist who had been working in Monteverde visited Sweden, and she met a teacher in Sweden named Eha Kern. She's the back center person in this photo. And Eha's students have been learning about rainforest loss and deforestation. And one of the students asked her, what can we do to help? Could we buy some rainforest to help protect it from being cut down? And much to this teacher's great credit, she didn't say, what are you, crazy? That's on the other side of the world. This is Sweden. That's the rainforest. You are children. She said, I don't know, but I just met someone who works in Costa Rica and maybe she can answer your question. And so Eha invited the biologist to her classroom and she told the kids that yes, not only was the cloud forest amazing and she shared pictures and stories, but that anything that they could do to raise money to help protect the forest would contribute to ongoing efforts here in Costa Rica to do exactly that. These kids in their first fundraiser raised enough money to buy the first 6 hectares of what today is called the Children's Eternal Rainforest. It was the first piece of forest purchased with money raised by kids. And I think even more impressive is that their effort inspired elementary schools and high schools, first in Sweden and eventually in 44 countries around the world, to donate money to help purchase and protect rainforests here in Costa Rica. The teacher and her husband eventually started a nonprofit to be able to channel money from Sweden to Costa Rica to the Monteverde Conservation League for land purchase and other conservation efforts. The league has had donations and partner organizations from kids and their grown-ups and organizations in Sweden, the US, the United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, and like I said, 44 countries around the world to date. There's also been fundraising and donation by international NGOs, particularly in the beginning. There was a bit of funding from World Wildlife Fund, from Nature Conservancy, that for nature swaps were important back in the beginning. But I think one of the things that makes this reserve and this forest so special is that really the bulk of the funding that came in for the original land purchase and also that has continued to allow us to protect the forest and all of its biodiversity to date has been the result of many, many, many people around the world, each giving what they have been able to. We haven't had a corporate sponsor. Sometimes I tell student groups, we don't have a sugar daddy. We do have a whole bunch of people who really believe in this reserve and in this cause. And for that reason, it's a long-term example of a successful international grassroots private conservation effort. If we look at this photo, I think it's really telling because this is just a screenshot from Google, but you can see what was set aside for protection because it's what's still green. And you can see what was not protected because it's what was cut down. The Children's Eternal Rainforest today is Costa Rica's largest private reserve. It's the centerpiece of that larger block of protected area. And another, I think, steep part of the learning curve for me is that I never, before I had this job, went into any protected area and said, I wonder what this was before it was Yosemite National Park or before it was Torrey Pines State Reserve or whatever. I never thought about the history and the effort that went into making a protected area protected. And in the case of the Bend, it is more than 200 separate properties that were purchased and set aside for protection. And now that I know a little bit about what it looks like to fundraise for and negotiate and purchase one property, that I think makes that all the more impressive that this is really an effort that has literally happened hundreds of times to make the Bend what it is today. If we could stand up kind of right on top and look out in all those directions, we would see to the north the Arenal volcano and reservoir and the Rio Caño Negro watershed. Looking out to the Pacific slope, kind of looking out from where I am towards the Gulf of Nicoya, we see a different type of forest, a different landscape. And looking out to the east towards the Peñas Blancas Valley, that photo is taken from the Continental Divide, a completely different landscape. And so usually when I'm giving a talk in person, I torture everyone by making them stand up and name some reasons of why it matters. We know now how this forest was protected. We know the story behind it, but why is it important? And so one of the reasons this particular forest is important is because it's the cornerstone of local economies. For those who have been to Costa Rica, or even those who haven't, they may have heard of Arenal or La Fortuna and Monteverde, which are two of Costa Rica's most important ecotourism and adventure tourism destinations. And the Bend is the cornerstone of this protected area that is pretty much sandwiched between the two of them, which means that this forest is providing the economic mainstay for people who are making a living, not only working directly in conservation or in reserves, but people who are working at a souvenir shop, at a hotel, at a restaurant, people who host homestay students, people who have coffee tours or offer cooking classes. This whole economy is based on the existence of the cloud forest in Monteverde and this huge protected area behind it. On the flip side, all of the businesses that are in Monteverde are benefiting directly from the existence of this forest, whether they would like to admit it or not. If you have a small piece of land and a tourism business, let's say a canopy tour, a zip line tour, it's one thing to have your property where people can zip line over it, zip line through it, but it's a totally different story if you have 50,000 hectares of protected forest in the backyard of your tour. To use the former UGA Costa Rica campus as an example, that campus is about 60 hectares in size, but it has, I think, 4 of Costa Rica's 6 species of felines. And that's not because it's 60 hectares. It's because it's 60 hectares backing up to 50,000 hectares. Water is a huge ecosystem service that is provided by this reserve in all of its many forms, from rivers to small streams, to lakes, to water droplets and mist that's being captured by the forest and brought down to be used by the ecosystem itself for human consumption, water for communities and farms in all of these 5 watersheds that are born in the Children's Eternal Rainforest. And of those 5 watersheds, 4 of them have hydroelectric projects. Some of them have more than one. Hydroelectricity is Costa Rica's main source of electricity. Depending on the time of year and on the year, it's somewhere around 70% of Costa Rica's total electricity. And so this forest is providing water resources, clean and abundant water that's generating electricity for people all over the country. Water from the Arenal Reservoir in particular, that much of which comes from the Ben, is pumped to the northwestern province of Guanacaste and used for irrigation. Biodiversity, the Ben is a very small piece of Earth's total surface area, its land area. It's about 0.00015 of the terrestrial area, and yet it has just a totally disproportionate amount of Earth's biodiversity. I'll give just a few examples, but this is, I think, one of the reasons why the forest is such an incredible treasure. It's home to, for example, 3% of the fern species on the planet. More than 3% of the trees in the Lauraceae family, the wild avocado family, can be found here. More than 550 species of orchids. About 3% of the odonates, the damsel and dragonflies, and almost 4% of the world's butterfly and moth species can be found in this forest. We have about 5% of the world's bird species, and this includes species that are endemic, that are only found in this part of the world, as well as species that are endangered. This is the 3-wattled bellbird, the brown one with the white head. It's an example of a species that's an altitudinal migrant and is endangered. The quetzal also is IUCN listed and is another altitudinal migrant. I'll talk more about that in a second. The bare-necked umbrella bird is arguably, if not the most, then one of the most endangered species in Costa Rica, and it also is endemic to certain mountain ranges in Costa Rica and Panama. So this forest is not just another habitat for these species. This forest, in some cases, is one of the last remaining habitats for these species on the planet. As part of a migratory route, the Ben is crucial for north-south migrants. So when we in the United States think of birds flying south for the winter, this is where a lot of them are coming or passing through. And we also have species like the bellbird, who's shown again here, that are migrating from the Pacific lowlands up to the top of the Continental Divide, down to the Caribbean lowlands, and making that altitudinal migration each year following their food source, which in the case of the bellbird are wild avocados. It's not enough to have land just protected up here on top of the mountain, because these guys can't make a living all year round on top of the mountain. They have to be able to eat all year round. And so the Ben protects land from about 900 meters above sea level on the Pacific slope, up to 1,800 meters on the Continental Divide, down to about 400 meters above sea level on the Atlantic slope. So this range and elevation is providing not only a migration path for altitudinal migrants, not only birds, there's a whole bunch of insects, including butterflies, that also have an altitudinal migration, but it's also providing resilience in the face of climate change for species that are able to move. And we see that happening in particular with birds here in Monteverde, really right before our very eyes as species are moving upslope. Frogs, the bend is home to an incredible number of frog species, including species who now are known to exist in the bend that were presumed to have been extinct, either locally extirpated or extinct on the planet due to amphibian decline caused by the chytrid fungus. And so these two species, Lithobates eurycarius, the green-eyed frog, and Ismoila tica, the tica tree frog, are examples of frogs that were thought to have been gone from everywhere on the planet and were rediscovered in remote areas of the Children's Eternal Rainforest. And so this is kind of a time to pause and think about what makes this reserve so special for amphibian recovery or for species recovery. And I like to use the example of, if we have a very small reserve, let's say a couple of hectares, any disaster that comes through there, whether it's a fire or a flood or a landslide or a fungal pathogen, the odds of enough individuals surviving and those individuals being genetically diverse enough, or at least being males and females, to be able to carry forth a population is very small. But when you have this large reserve of more than 22,000 hectares in the middle of this larger 50,000 hectare block, then there's enough space literally for chance to have a chance. And in the case of, for example, the green-eyed frog that you can see on the left, researchers went to study the species and found that it in fact is positive for the chytrid fungus. So it's not that it somehow escaped by being in a really remote area. It's that there was enough genetic diversity in the population that enough individuals survived and continue to thrive, even though they do have chytrid. Mammals, the bend is home to 6.5% of the world's bats, which is so cool because bats are out there every night doing all of the ecological functions that birds are doing during the day. It's also home to all 6 of Costa Rica's wild felines, and Baird's tapir, which is an endangered species and Costa Rica's largest terrestrial mammal. And I'll share this video that was taken by our camera traps last year. So when we have species that are large and have large territories, like tapirs or like jaguars, which we also have been catching on our camera traps or catching photos of on our camera traps since 2012, then we get really excited and feel very proud of ourselves and really enthusiastic and optimistic about how well our ecosystem is doing. But on the flip side, it really presents a new challenge because we know that in 2024 so far, we have documented 2 adult male jaguars on our camera traps in the bend, which is awesome for those 2 adult male jaguars, as long as they continue to live. But it is not awesome for the future of jaguars to have 2 males and nobody else. So that presents the next challenge, which is how do we connect the bend to nearby protected areas so that jaguars and other species with large home ranges and large territories can have a thriving breeding population and not hopefully an example of The Walking Dead, right? One individual who is thriving until he has no one to reproduce with, and that's the end of the road. And so now that you know a little bit about the story and a little bit about what makes the bend important, then we come to the next challenge, which is how do we make it eternal? It's called the Children's Eternal Rainforest. So how do we make sure that it really lives up to its name? And so we do this by carrying out our mission to preserve, conserve, and rehabilitate tropical ecosystems and their biodiversity, But really the on the ground day to day is that we're doing environmental education, we're working in communities, we're promoting research, and we're doing land purchase and protection with more of a focus on protection, but I'll talk about each of these categories a little bit. I mentioned at the beginning that there are 32 people on staff currently. We are spread out all over the Bend, and that's one of the things that makes our organization awesome. One of the things that makes the Bend an incredible natural reserve is one of the things that makes this administration really challenging, which is that there is not a road that connects my office in Monteverde to the office of the people on the other side of the Bend in a different province than I'm in. And so keeping everybody kind of in the same boat, rowing the boat in the same direction is a challenge. We have 4 areas that are open to the public. 2 of them have lodging and meals and trails, and the other 2 are open for day visits and night hikes. Visitation, as you'll see in a minute, is one of the ways that we are able to generate money to protect the whole rest of the Bend. Our main sources of income are visitation and everything that goes hand in hand with that. That's trail entrances, lodging, meals, guided tours, souvenirs. Payment for environmental services. We have most of our payment for environmental services are from the Costa Rican government's program that recognizes greenhouse gas mitigation, biodiversity conservation, and water resources protection, currently as a package, but this year they are separating them into 3 separate things, which is interesting. We also have contracts with 2 private hydroelectric companies who pay us for protecting the watershed that is providing their companies with clean and abundant water for electricity generation. Donations are another really important part of our income. And this graph on the left shows a little bit of why it's important to have a diversity of income sources and not have all of our proverbial eggs in one basket. Historically, we've gotten about half of our income from visitation and about half from payment for ecosystem services. But 2019 was the pandemic, and literally from one day to the next, we had no money coming in from visitation. This 24% is only because that fiscal year encompassed 6 months pre-pandemic. And we were able to rely really heavily on donations to help keep us afloat. But in any given year, it varies. Our expenses, our operating budget is about $1 million per year, and that mostly is to pay payroll. Our human resource is our most valuable and our most expensive resource. And our operating costs, other than that, are maintenance, administration, and programs, but much to a lesser degree. Environmental education. The League has been doing environmental education since it was founded in 1986. We currently have 2 people who are doing full-time environmental education and community engagement programming. One person is based here in Monteverde, kind of on the western side of the Bend, and the other person is based along the eastern border of the Bend. We just 2 months ago started to expand programs into rural communities along the southern border of the Bend, which are communities that don't have a whole lot of economic opportunities beyond agriculture and definitely don't have a lot of environmental education happening. And we do this in a whole bunch of ways. We historically have worked mostly with children, but recently we have started to include young adults and older adults in our programming to try to work with tomorrow's decision makers through the kids, but also to reach current decision makers by working with the adults. Sometimes because it's their parents of the kids that we're working with, and sometimes we're specifically targeting community groups or other adult population. Reforestation, the Conservation League historically has had a huge impact in reforestation in the 1990s through the Bosques and Fincas project, which means forest in farms. The League worked creatively with neighboring landowners to do reforestation in ways that were compatible with and even beneficial to agriculture. For example, planting windbreaks along the edges of pastures for dairy farmers, which results in better milk production, and also by having native trees and windbreaks is providing greater connectivity. That was a really innovative project that had a humongous impact on ecological connectivity in farms outside of protected areas. And I think that's really, really important when we talk about reforestation. Even the word reforestation sometimes scares people, because if I am a dairy farmer, I don't want to reforest my pastures because I need them for my cows. But if you have people to be able to explain that actually this is mutually beneficial, we can plant trees near springs, we can plant trees along fence lines. I think that's a really mutually beneficial way to achieve outcomes. We today have a really modest tree nursery compared to what we had back in that time, but we still produce somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 native trees of about 20 different species each year, and those are either donated or sold at cost to neighbors that are interested in planting them. Research is to say mostly that we are really interested in promoting research. We have started to do some more in-house research, including camera traps, including amphibian monitoring, but we also have acquired a drone, which we've been trying to use, you can see in the picture on the left, to map areas that are in natural regeneration. So the idea is to use the drone to, fly as a programmed flight path, and then to be able to use software to compare the orthophotos that are generated to track forest regeneration over time. We are in proverbial diapers in our drone use and analysis, but it's been fun to start learning. Also, flying a drone in the tropical rainforest turns out to be a really huge challenge, not only because of the rain factor, but because in Monteverde, it's really windy for about 4 or 5 months out of the year. And so sometimes it's happened a couple of times there where you hike for hours with the drone on your back to the site where you have planned to fly it, and you sit there and wait, and then you turn around and come back and are not able to fly the drone. We have MODIS antennas near our Poco Sol station that were installed with the help of a researcher from the University of California, Santa Barbara, with the idea of having this tool here to attract research. The MODIS antenna will track any animal that flies over it that has a tracker on it. Right where this guy in the middle is standing, about 2 months ago, a lightning bolt struck. Luckily, he was not standing there when the lightning bolt struck, but it was not a happy circumstance for the MODIS antenna controller. So more challenges of doing research in the tropics. We're currently in the process of figuring out how to fix the MODIS antenna system, but it's there, and hopefully we'll be back up and working for other researchers. These are a few of the greatest hits from our camera trap monitoring, which is geared at terrestrial mammals and large terrestrial birds, but sometimes non-mammals and non-terrestrial birds also like to get in on the action, like this hummingbird and this keel-billed toucan, who jumped up and down on top of the camera for a couple hours for 2 days in a row. We'll get to see some more videos from the camera traps in a little bit. Land purchase and protection. We are still interested in purchasing land. It's not part of our operating budget, but we do keep a list of priority properties that we would be interested in purchasing if money were to become available. When we do get money for land purchase, we focus on increasing habitat connectivity and filling in gaps. There are still some private inholdings in the middle of the bend, but there's also the opportunity to purchase property to help us continue connectivity downslope on the Pacific slope, or to continue connectivity in other directions. Today, when we get a donation for land purchase, we spend 50% of it on the land purchase and 50% to make it eternal. Back in the day when most of our land purchase happened, 100% of the money was spent to purchase the land. And that was the right decision, because that was the crisis. That was the emergency at that point in time. But now what we know is that purchasing the land to protect it is the first step in a very long process of continuing to mark the property boundaries, to do forest patrols, to do environmental education, to do administration, in some cases, even to take legal action or to defend ourselves legally when the case may be. So this is the current scheme that we have when we do get donations for land purchase. And last year, we were able to acquire 2 new properties, one that's 55 hectares on the Pacific slope, which brought our lowest elevation down to 900 meters. Previously, it was 1,000 meters. and 10 hectares that were donated by neighbors who had that property in natural regeneration. So that was very cool. Forest protection, we have a staff of 5 forest rangers who are responsible for patrolling the whole entire Children's Eternal Rainforest. Last year, they spent more than 8,300 hours of boots on the ground time carrying out forest patrols, almost 200 ordinary patrols, so just when they go out every day and patrol different areas of the bend, as well as 25 joint operatives with government rangers and police. Our rangers don't have police authority, which means that we have about the same authority to act as I have if someone comes into my house and is stealing my TV, which is I can ask them very politely to please leave. I can tackle them and tie them up and call the police and wait for the police to get there, but I can't arrest them. I can't confiscate anything. I can't do much without having the appropriate legal backup. And so our guys do a really fantastic job, not only in the physical patrol end of things, but also in the psychological and social end of things, of dealing with the different people that they encounter, and also the logistics of coordinating with the appropriate authorities. About a year ago, we were able to add a 5th ranger position before we only had 4 rangers. And that not only gives us a whole nother person, but it also brings a younger generation into our ranger team, who is also helping us to make better use of technology in our forest protection activities. This is to give just a few ideas of the things that we encounter, people taking things from the forest. So this is a case where our guys found a group of 5 men with a stack of 70 orchids that they were taking from the forest for ostensibly for sale on the black market. The guys who were taking the orchids out of the forest were definitely not the people who eventually were selling the orchids. I think they just are sent into the forest to gather any orchids that they can see. Somehow our guys with no police backup managed to convince these guys to hand over the orchids as well as to hand over their identifications, and we're in the process of continuing to try to take legal action. And Costa Rica's court system is a whole nother can of worms as far as patience and bureaucracy are concerned, but we do the best that we can. Poaching and illegal use of firearms and extraction of live fauna are also real threats. The pictures on the bottom that is a species of euphonia that is captured and sold as a songbird. Basically, this male is the bait who stays in the trap and either attracts a female by singing or attracts another male who is territorial and also gets stuck in the trap. The people in the picture are our rangers, not the people that were capturing the birds. And then on the top and at the right, as a case of poaching, this used to be a collared peccary. This is one of the rare cases where we caught the poacher literally with a dead animal in a sack, also with a machete and also with a very rustic looking firearm, which definitely does not have any type of permit. And that actually ends up being the way to go about taking legal action in many of these cases. It turns out it's easier to prosecute people for illegal possession of firearms than it is for poaching. We have started to use camera traps also to help us detect threats like poaching, and we're working with our legal advisors to figure out the best way to be able to make this evidence hold up in court. But in this video, you can see there's 3 men. There are 2 or 3 hunting dogs. The 3rd guy who comes up is holding a machete. This is the video that our rangers allowed me to use, but there's other ones where you can see the people's faces even more clearly. You can see firearms very clearly. Someone pointed out in a talk that this guy is actually committing an additional infraction, which is that he's wearing a hat that says policia, and he's definitely not a police officer. But so this is another creative way that we're trying to detect and deal with threats to the forest and its biodiversity. An emerging threat for the rainforest and cloud forest turns out to be wildfire, something that I certainly never would have thought of when I first started this job. But in the face of climate change, at the end of the dry season, the forest holds a lot less moisture than it used to. And some of our neighbors on the Pacific slope continue to do the agricultural practice at the end of the dry season of burning their pasture to regenerate new grass. for cattle and also to burn unwanted weeds and shrubs. It's not legal to burn. You have to get a permit, and there's no way to get a permit to do a controlled burn at the end of the dry season when it's also very windy on a very steep slope next to a forest. And so what that means is that people burn and then they leave because they don't want to get caught. And so in 2022, we started to push, no, 2021, we started to push for wildfire firefighter certification. In 2022, we were able to do a little bit of training, and not until the end of 2023 were we able to finally take our first formal course as wildland firefighters. And this year, our staff dealt with 2 fires in properties bordering or very close to the bend that, if they hadn't put them out, would have passed over to the protected area and burned many, many hectares. Definitely a part of forest protection that I never thought of before I had this job is the incredible amount of work that it requires to mark and maintain property boundaries. Sometimes it's along a roadside and you can do it with a weed whacker, but a lot of times it's a imaginary line between 2 properties in the middle of the forest, and that requires going out and hiking very steep, uneven terrain and clearing the brush by hand with a machete. These guys are amazing. They have my total utmost respect at the job that they do. And in this picture of our staff, it's a group of staff from different departments that collaborated that day. And in that group, you have everything from people who could build you a house to people who could bake you a birthday cake and everything in between. And that's something that's really special, not only about our field staff, but about all of our staff, is a diversity of abilities and a willingness to do whatever is needed. As an organization, some of the challenges that we have faced and lessons we have learned include making sure that we have a diversity of income sources. And I think we'd like to look further down that road, not only to have income from ecotourism and income from payment for ecosystem services, but also to increase our endowment fund, which is currently in its infancy, to an amount that generates a meaningful amount of interest that really can be a useful cushion, especially in times of need. Environmental education is really important for people of all ages, all the time. That became really clear during the pandemic, when a lot of people all of a sudden were out of a job, when we saw poaching and tree cutting and rates of other environmental infractions skyrocket. I think the importance of creativity, resilience, and teamwork is really a through line for this organization over the past almost 40 years. I think maybe the COVID pandemic was the most recent financial crisis that we faced, but it certainly was not the first, and unfortunately, it will not be the last. And having people who are dedicated to the job and just kind of keep plugging away turns out to be really important, as well as looking for creative solutions. Anyone can help support the Children's Eternal Rainforest. One of the most important ways is just to help spread the word. We like to tell people who visit us that they can feel really good about their visit, because 100% of the money that's coming in is going back into the conservation of the forest. Also, all of us, I know it's election season in the US, but all of us vote every day, every time we spend money. And I think that's a really powerful message, not only in terms of conservation, but in terms of creating resilient local economies that can withstand challenges that are thrown at them. I think I wanted to share a couple of videos because it's really easy to focus on one aspect of what's cool about the bend or what we're conserving. And I think, to me, it's really neat to see species in their native ecosystem and remember that what we're really protecting is the whole ecosystem, which is thriving and which we really know so very little about, all of the species interactions that are happening in the forest, all of the climate, everything. So this species actually was recently declared to be a separate subspecies that is endemic to these highland cloud forests, the clouded tiger cat. It's about the size of a house cat. and that we're protecting not only, one species and one ecosystem, but also all of the predator-prey interactions that happen in those ecosystems. And so these are actually two videos that were taken about 2 minutes apart from one another. So I think one of the things to me that is so impressive about this effort is that the people who started the Monteverde Conservation League didn't have the dream to start a reserve. They didn't have the dream to start an international fundraising effort, but their mission was to start a local conservation group that would promote conservation and sustainability, having no idea what it would grow into. And I think that goes for so many things. The kids in Sweden who did the first fundraiser done by children to support the Ben didn't say, hey, let's start an international children's movement to save the rainforest. But we never know who's watching, and we never know who we might inspire with our action. And so I know that it feels very overwhelming today with so many things that are going on, but is what I try to remind myself, is to take small steps, but to continue moving forward with whatever we're able to do at any given time, and hope that other people will join us. This is a picture of the lake at our Pocosol field station. This is a lake in an extinct volcano crater when the property was purchased in the early 90s. And this is that same property today from the same angle. Thank you all very much for your attention, and I hope that there is some time for questions if anyone has questions.